Hi, everybody. This is Gretchen, and I'm with the Global Green Burial Alliance. And today I am digging deeper and talking to Mallory McDuff about her work in green burial and sustainability. I'm going to read Mallory's introduction, and then we'll talk to her about her experiences with green burial. Mallory McDuff is the author of 5 books, including Love Your Mother, 50 States, 50 Stories, and 50 Women United for Climate Change, and our last best act, planning for the end of our lives to protect the people and places we love. She teaches environmental education at Warren Wilson College in North Carolina near Asheville, where she lives with her 2 daughters. She has a Ph.D. in Wildlife Ecology and Conservation with a focus on environmental education. And I reached out to Mallory because I read a story about her Lent experience with her dad and her dad's wishes for green burial. And I wanted to talk to her about her experiences with green burial. So, welcome, Mallory.
Thanks so
Nice.
much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you too. Um, Let me change my view there so we're both on. So, I know if it's okay if I talk about your mom and dad, but I saw that your mom had passed first and then your dad. And did your mom have a green burial as well? Or just did,
She excuse me, she did, but
Mhm.
she did have a green burial. But I think with my dad's death, he kind of took it to another level in terms of, you
Mhm.
know, the homemade casket and just the intentionality behind it.
Mhm.
So she did, but his was, even more green, if you could say
Yeah.
that.
So it wasn't entirely new to you when it happened, but because you'd gone through it to some degree with your mom, but then with your dad, he had full instructions.
Well, I think the difference was that in growing up, my father had always talked to us about the fact that he wanted his death to be handled by family and friends and not necessarily a funeral home. He talked about embalming as being injecting a dead body with chemicals. He made even out of pine. He made a little casket, a prototype of the casket that he wanted to build for himself, and my mom kept her jewelry in it. And this is when I was like a kid, and we I listened, but it wasn't really real at the time. It was just, I mean, that was how my parents were kind of they were homesteaders in the suburbs before that was even a thing.
Yeah.
So they volunteered on a farm to get their produce, and for Lent gave up driving, one year, gave up trash the next. So
Yeah.
so this was kind of the context of our life, but it wasn't like, I mean, he worked for IBM. He
Yeah.
sold computers. He wasn't some what people might think of as like a radical. But when
Yeah.
my mom's death was really sudden, and she was hit by a teenage driver when she was leaving a yoga class. Um, and and so right after her death, he sat us down and had a 2-page typed, um, you know, final wishes.
Mhm.
And it was very clear. He wanted to build his own casket, and if not, he talked to a friend who would
Mhm.
build it, for him if he wasn't able to. Um, he wanted his body to stay at home,
Mhm.
and he wanted his bluegrass band to play by the gravesite. He did not want a funeral home involved at all, and he outlined, the songs for his funeral, the songs he wanted his band to play. He wanted to be wrapped in my mom's linens. I grew up in Fairhope, Alabama. That's a very southern thing to have,
Yeah.
like, linens that are folded and ironed in the chest of drawers.
Yeah.
So so
And
so
probably doilies as well.
yeah, we weren't a big doily family, which is, but I have been around them for
Yeah.
sure. But so these were all very personal touches, And at this time we didn't have the phrase. I mean, I wasn't aware of the phrase green burial or
Mhm.
natural burial until years later when I started doing research about my own options for my book, Our Last Best Act. So he was 2 years. We at the time we thought he was. This was just kind of how he was grieving,
Yeah.
but we said we would do all these things. But I wasn't personally ready like to plan his funeral.
Yeah.
He was only 60 years old. He was my age. And my mom was actually 58 when she died, almost 59. Um, and
Wow.
and and
Young.
so yeah, so they were young, and they had through hiked the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail. They biked everywhere. Um, just like the epitome of health.
Yeah.
So 2 years after her death, he was um, tragically hit by a different teen driver, and after her death, he was he wore a reflective vest. He only biked on roads that had a median. He kept biking, but he was super careful. But it was a teen driver under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and he was killed immediately in a mirror image accident. Quite frankly,
Yeah, that's what I
uh,
thought of when I read that. Yeah.
yeah, and he anyway. It was oddly enough, they were both headed to the same um, CSA, community supported agriculture.
That's
That was their
crazy.
destination on different roads, but it was just the congruence was
Yeah.
honestly bizarre. And um, but at that moment, when it was so surreal that he was dead, those 2 pages of his directives really provided us grounding and momentum. So,
Yeah.
I went home to. I'm in North Carolina. It's a 10-hour drive. I went home, and at the time I had young children, and you think like, wait, we didn't even know where the body was.
Because you were 38, right? When it happened?
Yeah, and so this isn't a recent death. I've
You
had
probably
time
hadn't
to.
even dealt with, well, other than your mom, really.
Well, grandparents. I had grandparents who had died, actually all around that same time period. Um, but yeah, I hadn't. I mean, those were deaths that were expected, and
Yeah.
lives that were celebrated.
And family to support through the
Oh
process. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
completely. And I wasn't in charge.
Right.
I mean, I had like toddlers,
Right.
and um, so really, I just can't overemphasize how much his written directives gave us momentum. And this is really something I emphasize in my book, Our Last Best Act, as well as in I teach a class in
Mhm.
death, dying, and climate justice
Mhm.
um, at Warren Wilson College. And so what happened was we went home. We figured out his body was at the coroner's office because it was a hit and run.
Mhm.
And then it was transported before I even got home. It was transported to the local funeral home, and we were so lucky because the leadership at that local funeral home knew of my dad's wishes from
Mhm.
my mom's death. He was like, I do not want embalming. I don't want anything done to her. I don't. He had already in advance figured out that our local cemetery where they had bought plots did not require a vault.
Mm,
So
good.
so right then you can have a green burial as long
Yeah.
as it's like non biodegradable or biodegradable shroud or casket,
No
no
vault.
embalming and no vault. And so he had done that legwork for
Mhm.
us.
Which is
Um,
helpful because that's
that's
the process itself.
completely.
Mhm.
And basically we were able to. At the time we sat there, we're like, we can't do any of these things on his list, like we don't have any time. We knew we had to get his body buried within several days.
Yeah.
And then so we said, well, if we can do one thing on his list, one thing, then we will have honored him. And
Mhm.
so we called the person who was his backup person for the casket. And the friend said, definitely, I'll build it. I'm on it. And
Yeah.
he pulled an all-nighter. He showed up the next, in a day with the casket.
Wow.
Um, And then we went and met with the funeral home and said, we don't need you to do anything but keep the body cool.
Mhm.
And so they let us, and not let, it's our right. But
Right.
if you
Yeah.
don't know that you can ask for it, you don't know.
You
And
don't know,
so
and then they can say no, and then you don't have your right. Yeah.
yeah, so
Mhm.
my sister and I prepared his body for
Wow. How
burial in
special.
just the refrigerated room of the Wolf Bayview Funeral Home, and
Yeah.
wrapped his body
Was
in.
that amazing? I mean,
Oh,
I'm
it was, yeah,
yeah.
we sang his favorite songs to him. I mean, he was a musician. Um, so we sang to him, we wrapped his body in these linens, and we put it he wanted to be transported
Mhm.
in the back of a pickup truck, not in a black fancy limo.
A lot of men like that.
Well,
They do.
you
They
know,
like the back of the pickup idea.
yeah, well, I mean, he had a pickup truck.
Uh-huh.
For much of a lot of his life. So I think it was the antithesis of a limo
Yeah.
for him, and
Yeah.
it was very simple things that we were
Mhm.
able to do. But the friend who built the casket then transported the casket with his body to our Episcopal church. And in
Mhm.
our faith tradition, there's a 24-hour vigil where the
Yeah.
body's in the church and people sign up for slots, for the
Mhm.
24 hours before burial.
Mm.
Um, and after the service, that same pickup truck transported him to the local cemetery, and they had dug they had dug
Brave.
the grave site,
Mhm.
and then my dad wanted shovels around the grave site so young and old could put um, soil on his casket. And the thing, my oldest daughter was 6, and my youngest was actually I was actually pregnant with her when my dad died. And but my older daughter, what she remembers as she grew up, she remembers shoveling that dirt.
Yeah.
I mean, she has some core memories of my dad, less of my mom, but she remembers in both of their burials the physical kinesthetic
Yeah.
experience of hoisting up a big shovel as a kid and
Yeah.
hearing the sound of the dirt on the casket.
And being
So yeah,
yeah,
being a part of it,
being a part of it. Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Wow. It's a, I want to say your dad was a pioneer, but then on the other, he was a pioneer in modern burial, bringing back the old burial way, because that's exactly, other than the funeral, doing it in the funeral home and in the coroner's office, we would have done it in the parlor, you know,
right.
but it's still great that the funeral home let you do that there because a lot of people don't have a home to do it in, or, they're just in an apartment or what.
Right. And we were just given the hit and run, the crime scene, all of this that he had no way of knowing that
Yeah,
was going to be how he was going to die. We got as close as we possibly could to his wishes. And then, I mean, that experience, um, years later, I started thinking about, I had on my final wishes years ago, I had flame cremation. And then I
yeah,
started to become more aware of options in my region here. I
yes,
didn't even at the time, like when my dad died, the concept of conservation burial grounds, I didn't even know about it. This was
yeah, there's
20
maybe not
20
even
years
one.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I started doing research into options that were available here, and then this book, Our Last Best Act, became a way for me to weave my personal story and my parents' deaths into the narrative, but really showcase the people who are doing this kind of work, from death doulas to land stewards at
And
conservation burial grounds,
even
to
some hybrid cemetery
oh yeah, that
yeah.
totally. And
Mm.
it turned out, part of my research ended up realizing that there's lovely cemetery at the college where I teach and live. I live on campus and raised my two daughters here, and their contract
Mm-hmm.
required vaults, and nobody even knew it because there were
Oh,
so they hadn't done a full body burial in years,
right.
because
Yeah, and it
people
was
just
the
are
old, yeah.
yeah, so people they really honestly didn't know, and so a part of the book's narrative for me became like, how can I be in dialogue with the cemetery is owned by the Presbyterian Church that's affiliated with it's on the same location as the college campus, and so this became like a real kind of advocacy campaign for me, but
Yeah.
I had to be respectful of the essentially elders who were in charge of the cemetery.
Also, yeah, because they have
Yeah.
their
Well, yeah, and so
way.
I was just like, why wouldn't we change
Yeah.
the contract? This is like, our school is known for environmentalism. Environmental
Mhm.
studies is the most popular major. So I had to really check my like, why wouldn't we do this?
Yeah, and be sensitive around talking about it and stuff.
Yeah, and it was actually the middle of COVID. So, when I started my research, it was all in person, and I met with. So I went. Every chapter in the book is actually like a different choice in terms of disposition of the body,
Mm.
a different, more sustainable choice than let's say conventional burial, and so I was able to do all that research in person, but at the end when the book was almost due, I was like, I cannot believe that the one place in my home
Mhm.
might actually still require vaults, and just
Yeah.
because. But at the end it was we met by Zoom, and it was me and the pastor of the Presbyterian Church who had really been an advocate with me.
Mhm.
And then the three gentlemen who were on the board of the cemetery.
Right.
Um, and the pastor had said, why don't you ask for an exemption based on your religious beliefs to care for creation? I'm a
Yeah.
lifelong
Oh, yeah.
Episcopalian, and I was like, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And and I actually believe that.
Yeah. That's
And
we're
there
supposed to be stewards.
exactly. And
Yeah.
and so I thought that was a brilliant idea. And there was, as precedent, there's a Muslim student who was
Mhm.
buried there
Oh,
without a vault. And they were very respectful. This was, and I remembered the student. This was,
yeah.
several
Oh,
years ago.
nice.
But so anyway, but the guy in charge was still, his name was Ray Stock, and he was very stubborn.
Mhm.
um and so I thought, they're not going to say yes. And it was like, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm obviously not young, but to them, it was like
This is
this
a new
young.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Totally new.
yeah. So and they were worried about things that people think about, like, what if, how will we mow, and with, and there really, honestly, like I said, had not been that many full body burials. But the end of the story was that they we had the Zoom call, and the elders said, why don't we go to the cemetery, not me, but them, the three guys, and take a vote and just walk around and be together instead of on the screen.
Yeah.
And so they did. And as the story goes, apparently Ray Stock, who was kind of in charge of the board, said, I don't think we should give Mallory her exemption.
Mm.
I think we should change the contract.
Oh.
And
So,
so they rewrote the contract to so that it doesn't require vaults.
oh, okay.
And we have had several green burials since
Since
then.
that
And
was
what
going to be my next question was
Yeah, no,
having burials.
yes, we have. And what was super poignant is that Ray, about a month after, he was in his 80s, about a month after that decision, he, got sick and died at home, but his family set up a fund for maintenance of the cemetery in his honor. And there's a beautiful stone with a little plaque. And I just took my
Oh,
students there last week because many of the buildings that they walk into every day have the names of, former college leaders. So most of them had not been to the cemetery.
Yeah.
But we went, and they walk around and see, like, what names do you recognize, and they recognize probably half the names because these are college
Yeah.
campus leaders over the years. So it's a beautiful,
Yeah. That's
yeah,
such a great,
connection.
yeah, because visiting a cemetery is always interesting. And then when you
Right.
recognize names, it just brings so much thinking and, stuff.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, so gosh, and before this, there was hardly any burials in that cemetery. So the green burials inspired, I mean, there was some, but you said not in years. So the green burial really inspired people to get buried again too, which
Yes.
I think is great because
Yeah.
I know I've been through a cremation with a loved one, and fortunately the cremator guy let me help in that
Oh,
process, which
great.
was life changing for me. If I hadn't have gone through that process, my life could have been totally different now.
Hmm.
That's just how much of an impact and how important
Right.
us handling and facing death is, and I feel so. um
No, definitely. Well, and with my students just this week, we went to visit a funeral home where the funeral director, it's a four-generation family owned funeral home, and they got to see a retort, and talk
oh
about the
yeah.
fact that you can actually ask to,
Mhm.
whether
Push
to
it in.
view.
Yep.
Yeah, so and yeah, I also wanted them to, from some of the reading that we'd done, the students, I wanted them to have a more nuanced view
Yeah.
of the funeral home industry, and not and realize that I think some of our most innovative pathways are in collaboration with funeral homes.
Yes, a
Uh,
funeral. We need funeral directors so
yeah,
much. I mean, it's great we can do it in the home, but we need people to help us with this.
right.
And that's why I also want funeral directors to know what a beautiful assistance they can help families who want this.
Right. And this particular funeral home actually partners with the Conservation Burial Ground Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, which is nearby. And so for much reduced price, they will just like keep the body cool, transport the body to the Conservation Burial Ground, and then the staff there take it from there.
That's
So
great.
so that's an example of a win-win, I think, where they're just doing the bare minimum and charging the bare minimum, and then the conservation burial ground gets to handle it from there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. I'm so glad this is all coming along. And it's thanks to people like you and
Aw,
the conservation cemeteries. And yeah, it's such a beautiful thing. I know we're way a little over, but I'm gonna get you out on time. So
okay.
I'm gonna let you
So I
go
can
now.
go to my death and dying in climate justice class,
Yes, and
which
I'm
has been
gonna invite,
amazing. It's been amazing
yeah, yes, and I
to
want to
teach
invite
that
you back
class.
when we
Yeah.
do our forum on your state, because we're going state by state.
Oh, wonderful.
So I'll be back in touch with you. We're not done. And I'm
Good.
really grateful for you being with me today. And everybody, go get her books. She's got great books. I got to read it with my glasses on again. Um, Planning the End of Our Lives to Protect the People and Places We Love is the one she was mostly talking about. So go
It's called
out and
our
get
last best act.
Our Last Best Act. Can you get it on Amazon?
It's everywhere.
It's
Yeah.
everywhere.
I
Okay.
mean, not like everywhere, but it's everywhere you would buy your books.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you, Mallory.
All right,
And
great. Thank you, Gretchen. It's been fun. I appreciate
yeah.
it.
And thank you everybody for listening in, and I will see you next time.